Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Depends what time zone you're in. How are you guys doing? I am really glad to see you. I know I have, I can't see you, but I'm imagining it. I know I have some of you from last time and some of you who haven't been here before. So we are going to get right into it. This webinar, the Sunrise program versus ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, key differences. Now, keep in mind that I don't claim to be some sort of unbiased source that's just going to tick off attributes of both programs. Obviously, I'm someone who's been involved with the Sunrise program for many years. At the same time, it's given me a real insight to be able to see the differences that's between them. And I get a lot of these questions about what is the difference? What are the differences? How are they different? And as we know, ABA is the big bad program, not bad as in not good, but the big mama, the big daddy that's most often used around this country and in other countries. I often think of sometimes the Mac PC difference as a way of illustrating it. ABA is sort of like the PC, where there's lots of different organizations and companies doing it. It's really big, but they don't all do it the same way, and it's all about it's all about volume. And the Sunrise program has a little bit more akin to Mac in terms of there's one center that disperses it all over the world, and it's a lot more relationship based and it's focused on relationships. Now, I will say this: there's some things we're going to talk about today which I think will resonate with a lot of you, and I think there's a few things that you might find, shall we say, controversial, that you might think either you don't agree with or that hasn't been your experience, and that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Everyone here is entitled to their opinions. I have a bunch of questions that I've gotten in advance that I'm going to answer, as well as you'll have an opportunity to ask questions much later on in the seminar as well. So, you guys ready? You ready to jump in? By the way, my name is Ron K. Kaufman. I'm the CEO of the Autism Treatment Center of America. I am also the first beneficiary of the Sunrise program, as I know a lot of you know. I, as you know, started out severely autistic, tested IQ of less than 30. I would spend my days just doing what you might call stimming and flapping my hands and rocking back and forth. And my parents were told that I would never speak. I would never learn to communicate in any way. They developed the Sunrise program. It enabled my complete recovery from autism. Then they started in 1983 what's now known as the Autism Treatment Center of America, this nonprofit organization in Sheffield, Massachusetts, which is where I'm speaking to you from. And what I do think is important about that backstory, I got more involved in that story in the last webinar, so I'm not going to do it now. But what is important to understand is that that is where the differences begin between applied behavioral analysis and the Sunrise program. And what I mean by that is that ABA was developed by Dr. Ivar Lovaas for clinicians. So it's developed by a doctor for clinicians. The Sunrise program was developed by parents for parents. And that's important because doctors and clinicians are invested in our children in a different way than parents are invested. And this is why we have such a strong belief in parents. This is why the way that we treat our children is so paramount in helping them to move forward and progress, not just being able to check tasks off on a list. So we're just starting from a different place. Now, what are some of these key differences? Number one, I think the starting point really to talk about is the understanding of autism, the understanding of what it is, what autism actually is. We touched on this a little bit on the last webinar, but I want to hit it from a bit of a different angle. Applied behavioral analysis treats autism as a behavioral disorder. So the idea is there are certain behaviors that they want reinforced and promoted, and there's certain behaviors that they want extinguished, that they're trying to get less of. So that's the idea. We want more of some behaviors, we want less of others. They have a whole system of rewards and other things to do that, which we're going to talk about a little later. They don't support stimming. One of the main ideas also is try and get children to do their stimming behaviors, something that we call isms. Do that as little as possible. Try and extinguish the stimming. And they have different strategies for doing that as well, which we'll talk about more as we go along. Also, there's this whole notion of correct or appropriate behaviors, which are supposed to be rewarded in different ways with food and with other items. New skills and new behaviors are then taught through a particular repetitive method called discrete trials. Now, I know some ABA people will say we don't use discrete trials anymore, but most people, that is still the lingua franca of ABA in a lot of different areas. I will try and address differences, by the way, between us and all the different incarnations of ABA. Some are more traditional, and some are the newer incarnations of ABA. But all of them are about as different from sunrise as night is from day. So these are, if there's a whole spectrum of autism treatments, the sunrise program is all the way over at one end, and ABA is all the way over at the other end, and they are as different could be. So it's actually easy to really outline a lot of what makes them separate from each other. Now, the sunrise program doesn't treat autism as a behavioral disorder. We see it as a relational disorder, a social disorder, an interactivity disorder, so that our children have difficulty creating meaningful social relationships and connections with the people around them. And again, this is true whether you have a child who is nonverbal or verbal, young or old, a child who has not yet developed most skills, or a child who has developed a lot of different skills. A child with a huge vocabulary who's been diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome, or a child who has difficulty communicating even by pointing. No matter what, there's a huge spectrum there. And we address each child by starting where that child is. That's why the Sunrise program is called a child-centered program. And that's something that we have always done. We start where the child is. However, no matter where the child is, this is their central deficit. They may behave really differently. They may act really differently. But that is a symptom. We want to address the cause, the central deficit of what's going on. So we focus on this relationship building piece. Now, what does that mean? That means we're not focused on correcting inappropriate behaviors. You know why? Because we don't believe in inappropriate behaviors. We don't even believe in the word inappropriate. How crazy is that? We actually know that these children are doing the best they can. They're doing what they're doing for a reason. This is really important. When our children are stimming, what we might call stimming, or they're doing some behavior that might look really different or unusual, they are doing that behavior for a reason. There's a good reason for why they're doing it. They're not doing it for no reason. They're not doing it to bother other people. They're doing it to take care of themselves in some crucial ways. And so we take that into consideration, and we address it in that way. So we're not trying to stamp out these behaviors. We're not trying to correct what some people would call inappropriate behaviors. We seek a deeply bonded relationship. We're not focused on behavior change. We're focused on creating a deeply bonded relationship. And think about your own child, right? No matter where your child is. Isn't that what you really want? Yes, of course, you want your child to be able to go to school, or to be able to do different tasks, or depending on how old your child is, to use the toilet, or to use words. Absolutely. But don't you also want your child to really want to be with you and connect with you and want to look into your eyes and say that they love you and say that they love other people and really feel what that feels like, feel what that means? That's what we see as primary, and that's what we're trying to help our kids to do. So we see autism as this relationship, this social disorder, and we're trying to help our kids with it. And we're trying to give you tools to help your kids with it as well. One other piece of this that I wrote down is pretty important. We don't just want to teach children what to do to have a relationship, how to act, what to say. We want them to want to have a relationship. We want them to want to interact with people. We want them to care about people. We want them to care about relationships. And that is really important, because anyone can force a child to do something. We're not trying to tick a task off a list. We're trying to get a child to really be invested in other people. So that's one difference. ABA might see it as a behavioral disorder. We see it as a relational disorder, and thus we treat it really differently. We treat children really differently. Next area is area of focus. Now, again, we've hinted at this. ABA tends to focus more on behaviors because that is the observable thing. And remember how I was saying ABA focuses on changing behavior, and we focus on creating a relationship. So what does that mean? Okay, they might focus, they being, let's say someone practicing applied behavioral analysis, they might focus on discouraging a behavior. At different times they might punish or reprimand a behavior. The behaviors they might do that with, or the two biggest ones, are stimming kinds of behaviors, but also if a child is being aggressive in any way, or hitting, or maybe crying, throwing a tantrum, that kind of thing. Now, I know there's going to be someone out there who's going to claim that ABA doesn't work like this anymore. And I have to tell you, we work with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of families who've been doing ABA and want to do something different with their child. And the vast majority of everyone's experience is that places that do this do still reprimand their child, sometimes still use aversives, even though they might not use the name aversives. Aversives is sort of something designed to get a child to stop doing it. You might yell no, or you might slap the child's hand, or sometimes more severe things. We have a school that is still running in my home state of Massachusetts that delivers repeated electric shocks to their children when they do behaviors that they want them to stop doing. And this was controversial. It was in the news. So you can't really make the claim that this isn't happening anymore. One other thing I do want to just say, I'm going to read this to you. I told you we'd wade into some controversy here. I'm going to make sure we live up to our commitment in that regard. Let me just read you this as well. I got this from a mother who just recently took a tour of an ABA school. It's not the same one that delivers the electric shocks in Massachusetts. This is a different school that I'm not going to get into the name of the school or where it's located, but I want to tell you about her experience of it. She said she saw a series of rooms. The first room had 5 children. I'm going to read you what she wrote. First room had 5 children. The first child was being restrained with both of his hands kind of hugging himself, and his hands were being restrained, and the therapist was holding him down in his chair. She said she could actually see the child's fists and knuckles turning white. As this is happening, another therapist in front of him is repeatedly and with a stern voice asking him to tell her what the picture is that she's pointing to. After several minutes, the child is let go of, and he is still screaming and moving all over, and the therapist continues to ask him what the picture is. The child still screams, but now while screaming, the child points while crying, and the therapist marks a scorecard. She then goes into the next room. The next room has 2 boys playing a board game and 1 therapist on each side, next to each boy. One boy looks like, she said, he has a freeze cry on his face, meaning he has the facial expression of someone crying, even though he's not overtly sobbing. His face looks stuck in that expression, that's what she said. He has no language, and the other boy looks to have a little bit more animation and tries to play the game. The other boy with the crying face has to have the therapist do hand over hand, which means that the therapist is basically playing the game. And even at one point is shielded from even looking at the therapist directly. She says, I guess this is taking place because the therapist is trying to promote the 2 boys to look at each other. So they're promoting that by trying to force them to do that. At one point, the boy who looks like he's a bit more animated looks at the therapist, looks into the therapist's face, and the therapist takes the boy's head, turns the boy's head away from the therapist so that the therapist is facing the boy across from him. So he's not looking apparently in the right way that she wants. She wants him looking at the other boy, so she turns his head physically so that he's facing the other boy. While this is going on, there is a scorecard that the therapist is filling out. Both therapists look bored. So this mother then goes into another room. There are 2 children playing a game, and each have a therapist directing them. There's a little girl, and she says, I am told, this is the mother talking, I am told this girl is at grade level, and the little boy, I don't know anything about. Both kids have a dazed look and a withdrawn look on their faces. I ask if they are on medication. She's told they're not on medication. The children appear to be robots. This is her writing. At one point, the little boy was told no, no, and hand over hand was done to force him to play the game. The little girl was just going through the motions with no expression whatsoever and no eye contact. Her therapist was yawning and looked bored, and so did the other little boy's therapist. These therapists were also scoring a scorecard according to different skills. Now, the next room, I'm almost done here. The next room I visited, this woman visited, had 2 children doing speech therapy. Both children had no language. The therapists were working with oral motor with a vibrating instrument similar to a toothbrush. At one point, the therapist was talking to another therapist and forgot to move the instrument in the proper way. So the boy moved the instrument to the next and proper position. No celebration was given. These therapists did at least seem to be slightly happier than the therapist in the other room. There was another room, which was called the academic room. The observation window was covered, so she didn't see that. The final room was called the OT room, occupational therapy room. There were 2 children in this. One little boy had no expression and was very robotic, and the therapist also looked quite unhappy. The other little boy came in and was being filmed on a treadmill, apparently. That's what it says here. The children were either crying or robots. Every single child I saw was either crying or behaving like a robot. Okay, now, I'm not actually, contrary to what some of you might think, I'm not actually saying this to bash anyone. I'm not bashing the school. I actually believe that those therapists were doing what they thought was good. They were trying to be helpful to these children. I believe the school was trying to do good. I cite this because whenever I try and explain differences between ABA and Sunrise, I keep hearing people claiming that ABA doesn't do any of the ABA things anymore. Now, I'm a little baffled by this because basically I keep having people, as a way to defend what ABA is doing, claiming that ABA doesn't do the very principles that ABA is actually based on. Right? ABA is a behavior modification program. It is actually it has its intellectual roots in Skinner and others who were actually focused on animal training. And there is actually a training book that is for dogs that I know a parent that was actually given that book as a way to help her child. Now, am I trying to paint everyone with the same brush? Does everyone do it exactly this way? Of course not. Of course not. There's a wide range of ABA therapists, but I want to point out that this is still quite prevalent. And here's the thing I also want to highlight. Now they're saying that ABA is getting a lot more gentle. They don't use the kind of intense aversives and cattle prods and electroshock to the same degree that they were using it in the 70s. It's much more rare now. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, parents aren't willing to tolerate what they were willing to tolerate in the 70s. The other thing I often hear and read in articles is we don't need to use aversives. We can get the kids to do stuff in other ways. And I believe that when somebody tells it to me. But this is the thing to understand, and this goes to the core of the differences between the programs. Because it's not just a difference in implementation, it's a core philosophical difference. We haven't gotten more gentle over the years. We haven't used less punishments over the years. And do you know why? Because we never had them in the first place. We never had punishments. We never had things where we were reprimanding the kids. We haven't had to try and make ourselves more gentle. We've been around for 30 years. We've been around for a long time. And we've definitely improved the way that we teach this program to parents and professionals. We've created a very comprehensive developmental model over the years, which is incredible at tracking children's social development. So we've gotten better at what we do, but we have not had to make changes in the way that we treat children. We have not had to make those changes because we don't have parents coming to us telling us their children are being treated brutally. We don't have people coming to us telling us that there's got to be another way besides aversives because we were never doing that. So it's sort of a basic law of physics here. If we weren't doing it in the first place, we don't have to stop doing it. It's kind of how that works. So this is a core difference here. I want to highlight again, we're focusing on building rapport and creating bonded, connected relationships with these kids. I want to give you an example. It was very, very interesting to think about. There was a little girl who came to us. Her name was Carrie. And she would flap her hands like this at the outside of her vision. So she'd go like this. Flap her, not right in front of her eyes, but a little bit out here. Flap her hands like this. And her parents, who loved her, adored her, wanted to help her. They only wanted good things for her. They were taught through ABA and they had a gentle version of ABA, I want to highlight that too, to try and get her to stop doing this. And one of the things they would do is they would gently push her hands down and they would say, quiet hands, whenever she was flapping her hands. Now check this out. she goes to an ophthalmologist. She goes to a doctor. Okay, the doctor examines her retina. Okay, and what the doctor finds is that her retina, they're both defective in both of her eyes. And we have rods and cones in our retina, right? The rods see peripheral vision and some depth perception, and the cones are straight ahead in color vision. Now, Carrie's cones were just fine, but her rods were defective. Now, what does that mean? That means her peripheral vision and her depth perception were messed up. Basically, she was having trouble. So, this doctor, and we did not come up with this, by the way, this is what the eye doctor, what the ophthalmologist told these parents, was that actually, when this little girl flaps her hands at the edge of her vision like this, she's actually stimulating the rods in her retina and actually helping to build them up and helping to enhance her depth perception. So, this little girl, this little cutie, she's just trying to see. You know what I mean? She's just trying to see her way around the room. And everyone around her who's trying to be helpful to her is going, quiet hands, put your hands down. Okay, so I highlight this because this is a key piece. When your philosophy, when your core is based on behavior change, you're not going to necessarily look for that. And I can't blame you for that. And fair enough. If you're focused on how do I get her to stop flapping the hands and do a more socially appropriate behavior, then you're not going to necessarily be able to see underneath that behavior and be able to sort of tell what's going on. One of the things that we really want to do is, rather than forcing these children to conform to a world that they don't understand yet, we want to understand their world. We want to join them in their world. We want to understand what they're doing. And that's how we actually create a relationship that we want. And of course, we can help her with plenty of skills when we have that relationship. We can help her with all the things that we want. And by the way, I do want to highlight this about joining. I said this in the last video, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but joining does not promote more stimming. It actually does the opposite. We've worked with thousands of kids over 30 years, and what we see is that the more we join, the more kids connect with us and become part of that interpersonal relationship. The more they connect with us, and they become less and less interested in their behaviors. You know, it's interesting. We had Carrie's parents, the girl who flapped her hands. We had them start to join her, and do you know what? Over just the next 2 weeks, she started to become more interactive, and she started to become less reliant on that behavior and do it less and less. So something that she was doing the majority of her day, every time she moved anywhere, she would flap her hands. Just a couple of weeks later, she was doing it only for about an hour a day. And they just continue to see improvement from there. So this is something that's powerful. It actually helps these kids to move beyond their stimming, beyond their isms, but also connect with us while that's happening. And that's because our intention behind it is very different than trying to just stamp in behavior change. Okay, some other areas that we can talk about, that because these are not the only areas of difference. Another one is called repetition versus motivation. ABA more on the repetition side, Sunrise program more on the motivation side. What does that mean? Okay, so one of the things I told you we would talk about more is that ABA a lot of times uses something called discrete trials. What a discrete trial is it's designed to develop mastery in a particular skill or behavior. Could be dressing, putting your coat on, could be saying a particular word or doing a particular action. And it's called a discrete trial because they isolate that particular behavior, and then they repetitively and recursively give commands and prompts to do that behavior, and then they follow that up with a reward. So it works like this: prompt, behavior, reward. Now, once you get the child to do this, you have to do it several times because you have to show mastery. So, for instance, I saw a child who was... they were trying to get the child to learn to put his or her coat on. So they were giving the command, giving the prompt. They were saying, coat on. And then they would, first the boy didn't listen, so they were trying to put the coat on the boy themselves. So they'd say, coat on. They'd pull the coat on. And then they'd say, good boy. And they'd give him a piece of food. In this case, kind of a piece of candy. So they'd give this child a piece of food. Now, after a while, I will grant them this. After a while, the child did start to put the coat on more himself. But here's the thing about the way a discrete trial goes. You're trying to get this behavior and show mastery. There's absolutely no context. When I was watching this boy wasn't learning to put his coat on. The boy was learning to follow orders. Right? What do you do if you want someone to really know to put a coat on? Well, Really knowing that you want to put a coat on is you start to walk outside or you walk into a different building and you go, ooh, it's kind of cold. Hey, I'm going to put my coat on. So you go and do that. That's understanding the context, the reason why we're actually doing the stuff we're doing. Right? When you do the prompt behavior reward method, I'll just call it the reward principle for short at this point. When you do the reward principle, what you're doing is there's no context being built for why this child's actually being asked to do the behavior, which means, number one, you're not going to get a lot of spontaneity and excitement behind it. You will. Now, the reward principle is very, very popular. Part of the reason it's popular is it does get some children to do the behavior you want. So I'm not claiming that it never works for getting behavior. You can get a child to do a behavior this way. It depends on your child's personality. In fact, some children will become really aggressive and tantrumy when they're put through this. But some children will do the behavior. So fair enough. The question I always ask is, at what price? So now this child does this behavior. One of the most common complaints that we hear from parents who come in is, my child's really robotic. My child does do these 4 things that I ask, or these 10 things, but he or she does it in a really robotic behavior. It looks like it's programmed in. There's no spontaneity or generalization, or certainly no enjoyment behind it. And this is an important thing because robotic behavior is considered an attribute of autism. And here's what's interesting. I don't believe that at all. I think robotic behavior is actually a symptom of the way that we teach children with autism. The way that we teach children with autism. And that's important. I think if we brought up all of our neurotypical kids and we constantly just did prompt, reward, and we used the reward principle over and over again, I actually think a lot of typical kids would be robotic as well. So it's important to understand the difference between what's autism and what's the way that we're teaching our kids. So again, ABA tends to focus on repetition as a way of teaching something. If you do it over and over again and you supply a reward, you're going to get that thing taught. Right? So that's important. Now we come in on the other side of this. We focus on a few things. Number one, we think willing engagement is really important. And the reason we think willing engagement is so important is because we're not focused on repetition. We're focused on motivation. Okay? So we're less interested in constantly repeating a command or reward, and we're more interested in getting this child, this boy or girl, really motivated and excited about what we're trying to help them do. Really excited about it, really wanting to do it. There is nothing more powerful than a motivated child. I mean, there really isn't. I'm not claiming our children might not have huge obstacles in their way, but I'm telling you, the biggest factor for whether our children are going to overcome those obstacles is not how many times we teach them something, but how motivated they are to learn those things. That's going to make the biggest difference. That's always going to be important, right? Imagine this. If you have a little girl, you're trying to teach her to count to 10. Is it better to have her count 10 orange circles on a piece of paper? Or is it better to have her count something she loves? Maybe she really loves dinosaurs. Maybe if we ask her to count, if we do a game that involves counting dinosaurs and playing together, maybe she'll be more excited and motivated about it. And we believe that absolutely she will learn that much, much faster and with much more excitement and with much more generalization versus just learning to obey a command or to look for a reward. Now, there's some interesting points to this. A lot of people mistake when we talk about motivation. A lot of people mistake that for the reward principle, and yet they couldn't be more different. The reward principle says, you do the thing I want, I give you a reward. So sometimes when I talk about how important it is to motivate children, people say, oh, you know what? I already do that. I already actually motivate my child. My child really likes this train. I give him the train to play with every time he does something I want. Right? And fair enough. I won't deny that the child might be motivated by the train or by a piece of food or by whatever you're giving that child. But this is not that kind of motivation. This is about real, ongoing motivation. That's not about the reward. It's about getting them motivated about the thing you're trying to help them learn, about the actual thing you're trying to help them learn. And that is so, so powerful. One of the ways that you can think about this is this. A reward comes after the fact and separate from the fact. Okay, you say this word I want, I'll give you an M&M. You go to the toilet, I'll let you stim or play with your favorite toy. Okay. That's how a reward principle might work. Right? The way we do it is we start with the child's motivation. We talked a little bit about this last time. Actually, we talked a bunch about it last time. So I'll just skim over it now. But basically, we start with the child's motivation first. If they're motivated to do things that are really physical, we start with that. If they're motivated by a particular toy or character, we start with that. If they're motivated by numbers, we start with that. We start with the thing they're motivated with, and we build a game around that that's fun and exciting and engaging for them. Right? Then we start to challenge them in different ways, specifically social ways, to be more and more interactive, but using a game they're already motivated by. Therefore, we're not working against the grain. We're giving them a chance to actually use the skills and motivations that they already have. That's really exciting because they already have the motivation about this particular subject or game, and we use that. We utilize this child's motivation.